Hi everyone, welcome to Global Compliance Panel, a live webinar on FDA requirements for device labeling, development, contents, distribution, and changes. My name is Liz and I'm going to be your host today. On behalf of the Global Compliance Panel team, I would like to thank you for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by Jeff Kassoff. Jeff Kassoff is RAC, CQM, and is the Director of Quality at Medivators, a leading manufacturer of endoscopy and colonoscopy devices, where he oversees the operations of the quality system. In this position, Jeff is responsible for oversight of the document control system and is the primary liaison with regulatory officials. Prior to this, Jeff spent 13 years at LifeTech Incorporation as the Director of Regulatory Affairs, where he was responsible for compliance of corporate quality system. Jeff received his Regulatory Affairs certification in 1996 and his Quality Management certification in 2013. We are really honored to have such a distinguished person, such as Jeff Kassoff, to present this webinar with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I would like to inform you of this program outline for this training session. This webinar is for 60-minute duration. First, Jeff will take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that will be covered, and he will then share with you his presentation. I would also like to inform you that all participants, once they're part of this teleconference, they have been placed on mute, and it will remain so until the Q&A begins towards the end of this webinar. This is for the purpose of avoiding any kind of discontinuity and also for allowing the presenter to speak clearly so that everyone who is present in this webinar can take maximum benefit from this. I also request all to hold back your question until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of time will be allotted for the Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. And if for any reason you get logged out of this training session or teleconference, I request you all to follow the same procedure to join in again. Now that we are all ready to start, I request Jeff to take it from here. Jeff.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Liz. Let me welcome everybody to this webinar. For those of you who have not attended webinars before, and I guess that audience is dwindling these days, really the only detriment, the only downside is that I can't see you and you can't see me. The way I like to address that is at the end, certainly we'll have a Q&A session. If you want to have it be more, of a dialogue, we can certainly do that. And my aim here is to meet all of your requirements and to answer any questions or address any issues you have. As you're well aware, today's webinar talks about device labeling. As regulatory topics go, this is kind of a dry one. When we're looking at things like complaint handling or design control or supplier management, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of interpretation, and in my experience, it allows us in industry to use that to our advantage, to be able to plan for and make sure we have the leanest processes in place that eliminate as much waste as possible. Device labeling, not so much, a little bit when it comes to distribution and changes, but for example, when it comes to labeling content, content is what it is. Information must be on the label, and the regulations are kind enough to list what those requirements are. There's no interpretation there. Something either is or isn't on your labeling. And the dryness of this topic is what that lends to is an exact interpretation. No room for gray area, but a checklist almost to make sure that all of this information is on your label. From an outline perspective, we'll begin with what is labeling, what constitutes labeling. Then we'll move on to the regulatory requirements associated with labeling. I want to talk after that about misbranding, and we'll define that and give some examples, and then talk about a similar kind of item, false representation and misleading statements. And then we'll talk about objectionable labeling, not so much forbidden from an agency perspective, FDA perspective, but examples of labeling that, in my experience and other articles I've read, the agency sometimes takes issues with. Then we'll talk about the regulatory requirements and exemptions, with the regulatory requirements with regard to exemptions from requirements for labeling. Then we'll move on to over-the-counter devices, admittedly a small subsection of the device field. However, it's something not only some of the attendees at seminars and webinars are manufacture over-the-counter devices, but all of us go to the pharmacy. We purchase over-the-counter devices. I kind of like this section because it's a little interesting that each time I go to the pharmacy to pick up some kind of over-the-counter device or even pharma product, that I'm looking to make sure that everything is there on each of the areas. Then we'll talk about the QSR labeling requirements and the sequence of label control. The best way to implement a good, robust label control system is in the sequence that I'll mention here based on experience. Then we'll talk about the general requirements as far as the labeling process. And then, again, admittedly a small subset of the device field, but sterile device labeling. It has its own peculiarities. And then we'll talk about labeling changes, how to make changes, and what to do and what not to do. And then I do want to end briefly with a mention about European Community, CE implications. So the first question is, what is a label? What is labeling? So it's anything written, printed, or even graphic. A symbol can be considered labeling, not just words or descriptions. So it's on the device, the actual device itself, or on any of its containers or packaging, a pouch, shelf carton, shipping box, anything that the device is in, either immediately or subsequently. And anything also that accompanies a device after the device is shipped. Obviously, the most, the biggest example would be an IFU or DFU, instructions for use or directions for use, piece of paper or a pamphlet that is included with the device. It's certainly not on the device or its container, but the drafters of the regs didn't want us to claim that anything accompanying a device is not under the same regulations. But something interesting, interpretations of the concept of accompanying the device have been extended to, as far as precedent, to more than just a physical association with the product. Anything that can eventually be brought together with the device after shipment has been found to be accompanying. So the examples here in the second bullet point under accompanying, posters, direction sheets, instruction books, brochures. So anything that's going to end up with the device has been considered labeling, and you ought to consider it as labeling also. Advertising is also considered labeling to a large extent, and we'll talk about that. The appellate courts almost consistently determine that advertising is labeling because the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act defines labeling as all printed matter accompanying any article. And there's the interpretation of the word accompanying. Again, it's not just something that you package with the product, like, again, instructions for use. It's anything that is written. So all of your promotional materials, all of your flyers are considered to be labeling and must be treated as labeling. One of the nonconformances, one of the regulatory issues that could be found with your labeling is misbranding. And when it's the actual device that is found to be misbranded, and a device is found to be misbranded, if the labeling is false or misleading. I mean, those are admittedly very large terms. So it's not limited to outright lies, false, fraudulent, for example. If the labeling proves deceptive to the customer, and what you need to do here is, one of the reasons why what some firms do with all of their advertising material is subject it to through their change control, through their ECO or ECN process, so that more eyes can look at it. Sales and marketing people come from a particular education, they have a particular skill set, their goal is to sell product. What I find behooves the compliance of this type of promotional literature is a review, a multi-departmental